All right, we should be live. Of course, this is pretty late. I mean, it's like 12:40 a.m. my time. I gotta check this audio to see if it sounds good though. Let me see. Just gonna check the audio. See how it sounds. Okay, this can work. Yeah, yeah, this works. I think initially when I tested this, so what I'm doing right now is I'm using the built-in webcam instead of an external webcam, and I'm using the built-in microphone of the laptop instead of an external microphone. So that way, God willing, the microphone can't be disconnected because it's literally built into the laptop. It's not like, plugged in with a USB or anything, So yeah. All right. Hopefully this is good. Greetings, people, and welcome back to Let's Read the Original Douay Rheims Bible. Of course, at the end of the last installment, the audio went mute. So I will be beginning first by covering the annotations for chapter 11, which is what I was reading when the audio went mute, I believe. And then, God willing, I think we'll cover the next section of the Douay Rheims Bible here. Okay, the original. So, when it's kind of interesting actually, right now, the reason why I'm able to record at this time is because my earthly mother actually has gone on a trip until I think Monday or something like that. So actually, by God's providence and mercy, I have the apartment to myself until that point. So honestly, it's quite a blessing. But it's very interesting that today, around 7 p.m. or so about 5-6 hours ago, well, I say about 6 hours ago approximately, I heard meowing, and I was wondering where it was, and then eventually, kind of tracked it and found out that there was a kitten at basically near my back door. Basically seemed to be stranded, meowing desperately. It was raining outside. The kitten was wet and cold. I looked around to see is there a mother around here? Anything. There was a cat across at to my neighbor's place, a distance away. But it wasn't it's not it didn't seem to care about this kitten at all, or you know what I mean? So I was like, okay, that's probably just a random cat, I guess, not necessarily the mother. So I, brought the little kitten inside or whatever and wrapped it in a towel and stuff like that, dried it off and all that. And I bought some cat supplies, kitten things like kitten milk replacer, a flea comb as well. Although when I tried giving it, I have to get a syringe, God willing, like a kitten nursing kit, I guess is what it would be called. Because when I tried to I tried to put a little bit of the milk on my finger, see if it would consume the milk, but it wasn't really doing it. And I think in the towel it was I think it was trying to find its mother's, to nurse, but obviously his mother's not here, and I looked outside several times trying to see if I saw a cat anywhere that I don't know, but yeah, this is actually the second time in my life that I've rescued a kitten. When I was in Barbados years ago, my earthly mother and I believe, rescued a kitten that was in the middle of the road. It would have probably gotten run over by a car or something if we didn't, save it. And we had it for a while. We named it Miko. This cat here, I mean, I'm currently trying to see if I could find an animal rescue place or something to take it, I don't necessarily want to have a pet cat because, really the expense, you gotta buy cat food, cat litter, you might need to take it to the vet for something or something, so it's just the expense. And it's I'm not just rolling in money as far as income goes right now. So yeah, I don't know, but in a sense I do like cats. I really like cats, generally, But then it's like the expense, you know. I mean, if my earthly mother were to take care of it, then she could take care of it, I guess. But I don't know. I guess if God were to grant me to be more like to have more financial, you know, stability in a certain sense and stuff, then perhaps it wouldn't really be a problem. But right now, as I'm trying to like figure out the whole YouTube thing and see if that could, you know, become something if God wants it to and so on, like I don't know. I don't know, but it's a very young cat. I mean, his eyes are still closed, but is that young. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what happened to the mother, where the mother is or was, if the mother's alive or not. I don't know. You know, I really don't know. So it's sleeping right now, as far as I can tell. It was kind of like I think shivering and stuff at first, but no, it's like, you know, it's not shivering anymore. It's like pretty warm, I guess, and so on. But I do want it to like, you know, drink some of the milk or something, you know, or a milk replacement thing. But I don't know. We'll have to see. God willing, tomorrow when PetSmart opens, I think 9 a.m. It says. God willing, I'll try to get the nursing kit. I contacted two like animal rescue kind of places. One of them responded saying they don't have any room and they recommended like a way to find other places or ways to find other places. The other place, the second place, hasn't responded yet, I don't believe. So yeah, guess we'll have to see what God wills. But I honestly like I found it I found it to be an interesting coincidence, I guess, where like it was essentially like as soon as I got the house or the apartment to myself, my solitude was interrupted by this kitten, you know? And I feel like for me, like if God wills me to have children in the future, right? I took it as kind of like God showing me what having children can bring. Like it basically, when you have children, you can't really do everything according to your personal wishes anymore, you know? Like your free time and stuff like that is all dependent upon your children, you know, interacting with your children, of course, your wife, and so on. Like, essentially, when you have a wife or you have children, your time is no longer just yours, your time is also theirs, you know? And so I can see how marriage requires tremendous levels of selflessness because your life your life is no longer just yours. Your life also becomes your wife's life and your children's lives, you know? Like it's all intertwined that you can no longer only think of yourself, you have to think of them as well. And like they become this like intricate part of your life and your time, you know? So something like solitude would not really be as perhaps frequent or easily attainable if you have a wife and children as if you were like say a single man or something like that, you know? So it's interesting, but like, you know, I do pray that if God wills that for me in the future, that he grants me the proper spiritual disposition to carry out that state of life well, you know? Because I just feel like, you know, to me, the idea of marriage is not just is not just this thing that I want for like, you know, my personal joy or my personal happiness or something. Like marriage is a responsibility. That's what it is, you know? Marriage is a duty if you know, undertake that vocation. Like it's a responsibility, you know? When you marry a woman, you're saying to God, I will take care of her soul and I will lead her to you. That's ultimately the job of a husband, is to lead his wife to heaven. So I'm grateful that I can see that aspect of marriage, because I know like a lot of people get married for just like earthly reasons, fleshly reasons, and so on. And is like, those are not the reasons to get married. And the cat is meowing. So give me a moment. Let me see something. I'll be right back, God willing. Should I mute this? Or I don't know. I'll be right back, God willing. Okay. All right. Well, it seems to be not meowing anymore, but it's alive at least, So there's that. But yeah, I mean, marriage is a responsibility, man. Is a duty. Is not just this thing to do because you want love or you want happiness or whatever. Like, that's not a reason to get married, man. I mean, you really gotta think about the fact that if you get sacramentally married, right, you are bound to this person until one of you dies, dude. Like, it's a very serious commitment, man. It's not some frivolous thing like, oh, I'll just get married, like, now you really gotta think about it very seriously, man. You really gotta think about it very seriously. Very, very seriously. You really do. You really do. But anyways, let's now continue these annotations here. So this is Genesis chapter 11, the annotations for that. For let us make. Here we may see in Nimrod the common causes of heresies and the manner of heretics proceeding. For he, having a subtle, proud, and aspiring mind, first detracted from God, persuading men, as is noted before, not to depend upon God's providence, and finding some others of like humor, they conspired together and drew more followers by bearing the simpler sort in hand, for it was impossible wise men should believe it, that they would make a tower of defense against a new flood, if God should think to drown the world again. But their principal intention was to make themselves great and strong for the present, and famous to posterity, all which God overthrew, neither suffering them to build up their imagined castle of strength, nor to be praised for their work, but made them infamous to the world's end. And I believe when the volume went mute last time, what I was going to say, or what I did say, but it wasn't recorded, essentially was that, well, the audio wasn't there. Essentially, like, I hate what I said, it was like, I hate to hear infidels, heretics, talking about the church and like trying to get this centered. That's weird. Okay. All right. Is it twisted? Whatever. We leave it alone. But I hate to hear heretics talking about the church, right? Because it's like they will say stuff like, oh, the church needs to do this, and oh, there's something happening in the church. And I'm like, man, it's embarrassing, man. Like, I feel embarrassed for these people, honestly, like, in a sense, like, because there's a specific heretic that I'm thinking about that I used to watch when I was a heretic, and I can picture him in my, I can imagine him in my mind right now, and like I remember just him talking about quote unquote the church and stuff, and like talking about issues and stuff, and I'm like, And he had gray hair and everything. Like, he was quite up there in age. And I'm like, man, it's really so embarrassing that these people, like they spend these years and years and years studying, church history and trying to interpret the Bible and stuff. And like, they just die as heretics, dude. To invest so much of your time into something and to never actually perceive the truth. That's so crazy to think about. But it's like the Bible says, always learning, but never arriving at the knowledge of the truth. That's what they're doing. They're always learning, but never actually perceiving the truth, man. That's crazy. And it's sad. It's sad. Like, to me, it's sad that, like, say I'm a young man, 29, right? And God has granted me, of course, the blessing of perceiving the Catholic truth, you know? And then there are other people who are like way more in age than I am, 60, 70, 80, whatever and stuff, like, and they just learn so much but remain heretics and die and go to hell. And it's just crazy to me, like, man, I remember too, like, there was a heretic I knew from Tennessee who, like, I guess he was a quote unquote preacher or something like that. And he wanted me, well, I used to attend, I think I attended some online classes that he had teaching, like, heresy and stuff. And then it was during that time I became Catholic, at least in my understanding. Like, I raised that the Catholic Church is God's church. And I, like, evangelized to him and stuff, and he didn't accept the truth and stuff. But he was, quite up there in age as well, man, gray hair and everything. And I was like, man, like, these people spend so many years of their lives and teaching heresy and stuff and studying all this stuff and just remain heretics, man. It's so sad, right? It's sad and incredible in a way. Like, it's like, how could you study so much church history and remain a heretic? It baffles me, It really confuses me. And it shows just like how severely they are lacking in God's grace. Like, they're severely lacking, severely lacking, man. Because as the church teaches, if you persevere seeking the truth sincerely, and also, of course, obeying your conscience, obeying the natural law, God will enlighten you with the Catholic faith. If you sincerely strive for the truth, sincerely in the truth of your heart, you will become Catholic, man. You will become Catholic. That's what happened to me. I became Catholic, just as the church says. Wow, man, crazy. And that's another thing too that, like, is another foundation to my faith, is that I know that I sincerely sought the truth. Like, I know that. I'm like, I know that I sought it sincerely. Like, I know that, man. Of course, I can't read someone else's heart, but I know my own. And I'm like, I know I sought the truth sincerely. And this is it, I know my own heart as far as I sought the truth. And I know that, So I can see that truth of the church's teaching right there in my own life personally, And another thing that I thought about recently that is so beautiful to me is how God shows mercy to different souls, and basically, like, how he basically, like, adjusts his requirements based on his knowledge of the soul. Like, for example, for me, right, I had to go through this epic quest, literally traveling the country and stuff, like this epic journey, striving and fighting to find the truth, right? This incredibly just I guess you could say, incredibly difficult and tumultuous path to find the truth. I had to really fight and claw for it. And there's another person that I know who God converted them, God enlightened them just through me sharing the truth with them, you know? And it's like that contrast highlights God's mercy to me, because it's like God didn't require that person to go through the violent struggle that I had to go through. He didn't require them to have to fight with such vigor and stuff as I did, to undergo that like extremely strenuous and difficult path, to find the truth. All that God required of them, in a certain sense, is when He tells you the truth, you accept it and believe it, And it's like, to me, it kind of like, I feel like it gives me a clearer understanding of God's mercy, because perhaps God would know, right? Or God knows that if I require this person to undergo such a difficult, tumultuous journey, they perhaps would not persevere in it and would be disheartened or discouraged or whatever, and not end up actually, fighting all the way to finding the truth. Whereas a different person, God might be like, okay, this person, I can work with them to lead them through this extremely intense journey, and they will actually persevere to find the truth, And so it's kind of like, to me, it's kind of like God adjusts His requirements of the person based on His knowledge of the person's soul, their characteristics, their disposition and stuff. Like He knows what a soul can handle. He's like, this soul can handle this, but this soul, I'll be easier on them. I'll have, perhaps in a certain sense, like a greater mercy on them, and not require them to undergo this extremely difficult task or this extremely difficult path, And it's just beautiful to me, like the mercy that God showed that person, by having them be enlightened in such a simpler way. He didn't require them to like abandon everything and travel across the country and visit a monastery. And he didn't require them to do all of that. All He required was for them to accept the truth when they hear it, And it's beautiful to me, it's beautiful to me, man. And of course, I'm not saying that I have some infallible understanding of God in this sense here, but I'm just saying, like, these are the thoughts that occur to me based on my mind comparing those things, Like, it's so beautiful, because it's kind of like how I believe in the New Testament, it speaks about the stronger members in the church and the weaker members and stuff like that, And it's like, it kind of perhaps can be compared to something like that, where it's like God knows that a certain person, He can inspire that person in a certain sense, of course, to persevere through this difficulty, whereas another person needs to be treated more gently and not undergo this same intensity of spiritual warfare and stuff as someone else, But it's beautiful, though. It's just beautiful, I guess it's kind of like how, like, you don't treat a small child the same way you treat a grown man, right? Like you treat them differently because you understand the different characteristics of the different persons, Like you're a bit more gentle with a child than you would with a grown man and stuff like that, It's just beautiful to me, man. It's beautiful because God knows every soul, and He knows what each soul can handle. And He's like, perhaps He's like, This soul, I'll be a bit easier on them. This soul over here, I'll have them undergo a much more severe and intense journey. You know, just beautiful, man. It's very beautiful. Very, very beautiful. It's truly beautiful. Yeah. Very, very beautiful. But yeah, like I do hate to hear heretics talking about quote unquote the church, because it's like, dude, you really think that just a bunch of clones doing just random nonsense, contradicting each other, teaching foolishness, you think that is God's quote unquote church, man? Just a cacophony of fools, It's just so disrespectful, dude. Like, it's completely disrespectful. It's just disrespectful. The Bible says God is not the author of confusion, right? God is not the author of confusion. So therefore, a bunch of random clones doing stupidness and contradicting each other, that's not God's church. That's not God's church. God's church has order and unity, Of course, there have been schisms at certain points, as we're undergoing a schism right now. The most horrible schism in church history. That's what we're living through, But yeah, as far as the true faith is concerned, one doctrine, one teaching. That's it. Not, this clone over here professing that, this person professing this person professing this, and they're all in the church. And no. If you obstinately profess heresy, you're not in the church. You're not in God's church. You're outside, But see, they don't realize that. They don't understand that. They don't understand that to be in the church, you have to actually profess the infallible truth. They think you're just like, everybody just interpret however they want to and make up whatever. We're all part of the quote unquote church. No, you're not. You're heretics. That's why you're just disorganized clowns. Oh my goodness, man. And then regarding the heliocentrism, geocentrism thing, I sent an email recently to the person that I mentioned I was having a conversation or email conversation with about that subject matter. And essentially, I believe what I'm going to do, God willing, or what I feel compelled to do, God willing, is I'll make a video talking about that whole subject matter, going over the information and everything. And then I will send that video to that person. And if they continue, claiming that geocentrism is somehow doctrine or something like that, no more communication with me and them. It's really that simple, because I feel like, it's like, I feel like I've gone over this with them before. Like, I feel like we've already covered this information, but yet they still are like holding on to this thing. And I've reached a point where is like, yeah, my soul is like, don't listen to another word they say. Don't listen to another word. Not another word. And you see, that's the thing. I thank God for that, man. It's like, you have to understand that you are not guaranteed to persevere in the Catholic faith unless God promises you that, like through divine revelation. Like, you're not guaranteed to persevere in truth, right? And so you must understand that just like anyone else, you can fall into error, you can fall into heresy, you can whatever, you can fall away as well. But as I said before, it seems that a lot of people have a complacency and an overconfidence whereby they believe that they can't become a heretic or something like that. And I'm like, you can. Okay? And you have to be aware of that. And that is why it is so important to avoid conversations with heretics, especially about religious matters, because they can poison your faith. They can cause you to doubt the truth. They can cause you to fall away. And if you die falling away from the church, you're going to hell with those heretics forever. It's not a joke. It's not a game. It's not just, this is my friend. No, it's a very serious matter. So yeah, As far as that person is concerned, I would say at one point, I was confident in the thought that they were a true Catholic. Currently, my thought process is like they might just be a true Catholic who is, confused about this thing, or, lacking clarity regarding this thing. It's possible. I'm not going to say that they're definitely like a heretic or something like that. For example, I'm not going to say that for certain, but my soul does feel compelled to avoid further interaction with error. And I'm like, not talking about this anymore. God willing, I'll make the video, send it to that person. Either you accept the truth or don't talk to me anymore. It's really that simple. It's really that simple, man. And that's the thing too, is like, I think about these things often, where it's like, even if somebody accepts the true papacy right now, or they profess the truth right now, I'm aware that that person can apostatize. That person could become a schismatic. That person could become a heretic. So you can't really have this kind of naive trust and belief that someone will persevere, even yourself, right? So if you can't know for certain that you will persevere, how can you know for certain that somebody else is going to persevere? You know? So when I interact with people, even people who might be real Catholics at that point in time, in most cases, God willing, like, I keep a sort of spiritual distance in my heart, or a spiritual reservation. Like, basically, you can't let your guard down in a certain sense, right? You got to be aware always, even when talking to someone who is a real Catholic. Keep your spiritual guard up, because you don't know that that person is going to persevere. And one day they might become a heretic and try to pull you away from the church. You don't know. You don't know. Okay? So you have to always bear that in mind. Bear that in mind, and kind of like have this, I guess, a cautious hope regarding the person. A cautious hope. But it can only be hope. It can't be an infallible certainty. Unless, of course, God divinely reveals that to you or something like that. Short of that, you can't have this infallible trust and belief that someone will persevere as a real Catholic. You just can't. Because you don't know if you're gonna persevere. So you can know if they're gonna persevere. You don't know if you can persevere, So yeah. All right, let's continue now. So let's see. Oh, I was mentioning too in the other when it was muted, I think. When the Lord says, if he will not hear the church, let him be to thee as a heathen and a publican, right? What church is the Lord talking about? He's not saying, oh, listen to the Lutherans and listen to the so-called Methodists as well. Listen to the so-called Pentecostals too, and listen to the, whoever other heretics. You can't listen to all of them. You can't hear all these clowns at once. You can't believe everything that all of them teach at the same time. It's not possible, because they all contradict each other. So you can't possibly, hear the Lutherans and also hear the Eastern heretics and also hear the so-called Pentecostals. Like, you can't. So just by the fact that you can't hear all these people, and God tells you to hear the church, he means one specific organization, one specific church, not all these clowns teaching stupidness. You can't possibly listen to all of them at the same time. So just by that alone, you see, that kind of thing right there, to a logical and reasonable person, would show them, okay, so God says, hear the church. But I can't believe what they teach and also believe what they teach and also believe what they teach. So that means then there's one church I have to listen to, one specific church, the Catholic Church. It's crazy, man. It's crazy. But yeah. All right, let's continue. So 7, in the margin, it says, pride is cause of schism and heresy. False pretenses deceive the simple. Heretics prosper for a time, but are confounded in the end. Right? Then 7, let us confound. God, in dissipating this vain work. Oh, let me make sure this thing's still. I'm just so paranoid. Hold on. Make sure I still hear myself. I'm just so paranoid. All right. I still hear myself. Okay, good. 7, let us confound. God, in dissipating this vain work of men, would use the ministry of angels, as not only Philo Judaeus and Origen, but also St. Augustine, St. Gregory, and other fathers expound these words. Come, let us descend and confound their tongue, where they also note God's singular wisdom, mercy, and justice, so punishing the offense that he turneth it to his own glory, and the profit of all men, to his own glory and the profit of all men, showing his power and sovereign majesty by 2 great miracles. First, by so suddenly and utterly depriving all those builders of their usual tongue, that presently they could neither speak it nor understand it. Secondly, by giving diverse distinct languages to several sorts or families, which they immediately understood and spoke most promptly, as if they had long before learned and used the same. But to no man was given more than one language, and so, to the more commodity of all mankind, they were forced to part into sundry coasts of the earth, which they inhabited and replenished with distinct nations, having the same angels their spiritual patron and protectors, which had severally changed their language. And I want to mention something kind of off topic, slightly off topic, regarding the kitten, right? It is so like, it's so unfortunate that, let's say, for example, let's say you want to look at a video about how to nurse a kitten or something like that, right? Most likely, I would think, the person making the video is going to be a prostitute. You know, dude, like, it's just horrible. It's so horrible, man. It's like basically everything just corrupted and infested with prostitutes and stuff, you know? Even the other day, I was listening to, you know, like the animal attacks videos and stuff like that. And I saw a video suggested, and I started to play the video, and it was blurred at the time, I think. And then I just heard a man talking and another man talking. I was like, okay, so these are just men talking, I guess. Then it unblurred it, and I was like, a prostitute is sitting right there. I'm like, it's like the prostitutes are everywhere. You know what I mean, dude? Like, just ruining everything. Even wrestling, for example. You can't watch a wrestling show without there being prostitutes in the audience and stuff. You know, it's like they just poison and ruin everything, dude. It's like, dang, like you can't have nothing. Prostitutes in everything, dude. And you see, that garbage is because of the way our society is so godless now, with no gender roles or anything like that, right? Let's say the workforce, for example, right? Women shouldn't be a big part of the workforce and stuff like they are now. That should be men, right? The workforce should be men, at least for the vast majority, and women typically, you know, take care of the children at home, whatever, that kind of stuff. Of course, unless they're like, you know, a nun or something like that, or perhaps a widow, those kinds of things. But like, generally speaking, men in the workforce, women in the house. That's what society should be. But because society is so disgusting and godless now, with no order and no gender roles or anything, the workforce is infested with prostitutes. You can't work basically anywhere that is in person now without there being some prostitute around. You know what I mean? You can't work in peace and not have to see some filthy prostitute somewhere. It's horrible. It's truly horrible. Even if you go into construction, for example, though, right? You might still find a prostitute who's like, "Oh, I want to be a construction worker," you know. Or even if you say you're a construction worker in some, you know, making buildings or whatever, the way prostitutes walking on the street and stuff, you know, it's like, dude, it's just horrible. Everywhere is horrible, man. Horrible. So horrible, man. Completely horrible. It's horrible, man. Like, yeah, that's what I've mentioned before. I think like the safest way spiritually to earn a living today is remotely. If you have any job where you have to, like, you know, go out there and work in person with people and stuff like that, you're probably exposing yourself to seeing filthy prostitutes all day, man, which is just too dangerous. You know, that's just a reality. That's a reality, man. Prostitutes everywhere, garbage everywhere, everywhere. And I had another thought the other day too, where I was like, you know what? I just realized too, like these people, these prostitutes and stuff, right? Because they artificially tamper with their having of children, that is something else that also keeps them in the workforce when they shouldn't be there, right? Because naturally speaking, they should be having children and stuff because they're engaging in the marriage debt and so on, right? Engaging in that act and so on, right? They should be having a lot more children than they do, which should make them, of course, to be pregnant, can't work and stuff. You gotta stay home, whatever, maternity leave, whatever, all that kind of stuff. But because they artificially try to make themselves the masters of whether they have children or not in some way that's contrary to God's will, it artificially keeps them in the workforce when they shouldn't be there. You see, they shouldn't be there. They should be having children. Therefore, they should not be in the workforce because they'd be pregnant, all that stuff. But because they're not carrying out the biological responsibility of the actions that they're taking part in, they artificially keep themselves in the workforce to lead to the damnations of the souls of more people. You know, it's horrible, man. It's horrible. It's horrible. And it's crazy. Like that kind of like struck me the other day. I was like, wow, you know. And they speak in a way like they speak as if like they have this control over when they have children. Like, oh, we'll only have 2 children or something like that. Like, and they're like acting as if like this is good. Like they're deciding to tamper with God's mechanism regarding the bringing forth of children. You know what I mean? Wow. Because that's the thing. Naturally speaking, unless somebody is barren or something like that, a married couple that's of course engaging in the marital act and so on will be having tons of children unless they, abstain from that or whatever. You're going to be having tons of children, and that's what these people should be. They should be having tons of children, you understand? But they artificially prevent that from taking place. Man, I beg God to destroy this place here. I really do. I really do. I really do, man. It's too much evil, man. That's too much. Too much. Too much. Boy. All right, let's continue here. All right, let's see. Okay. Okay. Continuing. Secondly, by giving diverse, distinct languages to several sorts or families, which they immediately understood and spoke most promptly, as if they had long before learned and used the same. But to no man was given more than one language. And so, to the more commodity of all mankind, they were forced to part into sundry coasts of the earth, which they inhabited and replenished with distinct nations, having the same angels their spiritual patron and protectors, which had severally changed their language. These good were the family of Heber, as St. Chrysostom and St. Augustine prove. For seeing the change of tongues was inflicted for punishment, it appeareth that Heber and his family were innocent of the vain attempt, whose tongue was not changed, but remained the same, and of him was called the Hebrew tongue for distinction's sake, after there were many tongues, which before had no distinct name, being the only tongue of all men, the only tongue of all men. Again, touching the offenders who were punished in their tongues, that they could not be understood commanding one another, because they would not understand God justly commanding them. It says AL, I assume it should be all, commanding them all. They also reaped this profit, that they were forced to leave of that bad work, and withal to seek more ample habitations, who, if they had there more increased in number and strength, would without doubt, saith St. Chrysostom, have attempted worse things, and infinite manslaughter would have been committed amongst so many for possession of that one city and tower. Finally, the fathers note that as God wrought here much good by division of tongues, so he wrought much more by communion of tongues given to the apostles, thereby enabling them to gather one church of all tongues and nations. Awesome, right? And regarding the gift of tongues, to my knowledge, the only gift of tongues is the supernatural ability given by God to speak a language that you did not naturally learn. So I've not seen any basis in Catholic teaching anywhere for this kind of like gibberish thing that like so-called Pentecostal people tend to do and stuff like that. I think honestly, that whole gibberish thing that they do is either them just doing nonsense, or it could be demonic possession as well, causing them to just act in a strange way and do all sorts of like weird stuff, And I actually witnessed someone, well, they weren't doing that tongues thing. Although I think when I was a heretic traveling with that guy that I mentioned before, he would do that tongues thing. And he I think wanted me to try it or something, but I was just like, nah, I'm all set, man. I just always found it bizarre and strange and weird, So yeah, even as a heretic, I was like, I don't know about that one. That's kind of weird to me, man. Kind of strange stuff. And years ago, when I was probably 17 to 18, that kind of age, I used to attend a quote unquote Pentecostal quote unquote church. This was during a time when I was trying to be a quote unquote good Christian in a sense, kind of thing. And I remember when I would attend this place, there was a woman that I knew, young woman, let's say, who was like a similar age to me, probably like a year younger than me or something like that I had an interest in. And one day at this place, I was sitting there with another person that I knew, like in this building or whatever. And I started hearing someone screaming, like that kind of thing. And I recognized the person's voice. I was like, wait a minute. Let's say their name was, I don't know, let's say Megan, right? I was like, is that Megan? Or I said, that's Megan or something. I basically said, that's that person, And the person I was with was like, no, that can't be them, And I was like, no, that's them. And then I stood up and I saw them at the front of the, seats or whatever, just freaking out and stuff and, doing this kind of thing. And for the moment I saw that, I no longer had any interest in that person. None. I was like, I'm good. All set. I literally just left that building. And in Barbados, there, at least when I was there, you have these things called ZRs, which are basically vans that are public transportation. And then you have buses, right? I got either a ZR or a bus or some kind of combination, perhaps. Essentially, I went back to my house. I got out of there, went back to my house, pretty much immediately, and I never went back to that place. I don't think I ever went back there. I think that was the last time I ever went there. I was like, I'm not even going back there, And I remember that day. I think it was that same day, and I'm pretty sure I never went back there. Actually, I don't think I had a reason to go back there ever again. I think I never went back to that place. I don't believe I did. Can't say for certain, but I'm pretty sure I didn't go back there ever again. But I think it was that same day, after seeing that happen, I asked my earthly father, I think it was on the phone, I asked him, are demons real? And I think he just told me like he's not sure or something like that, because seeing that person act that way, I was like, were they possessed by a demon or something? I was so confused as to what happened. I was like, the conclusion I drew was this person was demon possessed, and it's so crazy that you can't even really sometimes I guess sometimes you can't tell that someone is demon possessed by the way they act because they might seem quote unquote normal in most of the time, but then they just have some sort of like outbreak or start freaking out and doing a bunch of weird stuff or something, you know? So yeah, man, like, and it's weird because after that happened, like it kind of made certain things make sense. Like I could kind of tell that this person was dealing with problems and stuff like that when I had like conversations with them and stuff like that. Like essentially, I think as far as the conversation, as far as I recall, based on some of the conversation that we had or conversation, either conversation or conversations, whichever, like I think they mentioned to me that they were having problems or something like that, you know, and I would have never really guessed that based on how they seemed to me from the exterior, you know, like they seemed quote normal to me. But after seeing that thing take place where they're freaking out and stuff, I was like, oh man, I could see now the problems or whatever, you know. So yeah, Hmm. Yeah, that was something that really did like I guess freak me out, you know. And but I will say though, thankfully, things like that, when God allows you to experience things like that or to witness things like that, if of course they work to your spiritual benefit, you know, God willing, they they make you more interested in finding out the truth about life, finding out the truth about demons, angels, God, and so on, you know. And so I think that experience made me start thinking about the supernatural world more. And of course, ultimately, God willing, ultimately led to me becoming Catholic years later. But it was a journey of years, you know, because that was probably around 2014, I think. So that was about 6 years or so, probably about 6 years before I became Catholic, you know, at least to my knowledge of, you know, professing that the Catholic Church is God's church and so on. That was about 6 years, I think, before that point. And probably over 6 years, because that was, well, I don't know when it was in the year actually. I don't know what month it was or anything, but yeah, several years. But it definitely made me start thinking about the supernatural world more, you know? And of course, there are several other things that took place in my life after that point that played like a very strong role in me ultimately reaching the point where I was determined to find the truth. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, my journey up to this point has been, let's say, not ordinary. You know, it's not been an ordinary journey, but I haven't like I've shared my like journey with people in the past and stuff like that. At least until the point, or for God willing, to the point where I was speaking to them at and stuff like that. But I mean, I thought about speaking about my journey in detail on here, but I'm not sure if I will or not. I'm not certain. I'm not certain because like I don't know. I mean, part of me is not opposed to it, but there's also part of me that like I don't want it to seem as if I guess I'm bragging or something, you know? So I think about that aspect of it. Like I don't want there to be any, I guess, appearance of pride or actual pride because of that. Because I mean, that's the thing is like I can't I can't pretend that I've not experienced what I've experienced, you know, like as far as of course within my own heart and soul and my own mind. And God allowed me to experience these things, So I don't know. I don't know. Hmm. I think God willing, not saying I'm like, committing to this necessarily, but I think God willing, the best way, if God wills at some point, to share my story in a public way would be if, like, I have, I'm aware, for example, I've reached the end of my life, and God willing, hopefully God willing, I'm in the state of grace, and I'm basically prepared to die well, to die as God's friend. Perhaps at that point, that would be a good time to share my story publicly, you know, because at that point, God willing, it would be a story with a good ending, because of course, until you get to your deathbed, or until you actually, die and so on, unless God has divinely revealed it to you, you don't know that you're actually gonna die as a saint, die in the state of grace. So I think that's the best way to share a life that is like what I've experienced thus far, you know, so that God willing, like, is like basically like share it once God willing, I know the ending is good. I'm like, okay, so all this stuff ultimately led to me going to heaven, God willing, like that's I think that's the best way to share something like that, because it's been really quite a journey, man. Like, honestly, it's just to me so it's crazy, man. I mean, that's the thing, is like, the things I've experienced, like, honestly, I think I would enjoy watching a movie about it, like, honestly, like, for real, being like completely serious. Yeah, I've thought about those kinds of things. But I think, yeah, as far as, like, as I said, I have shared my, journey and life journey and so on with people in the past, but is in a private context, like a one-on-one conversation kind of thing, not in a public. Well, I might have mentioned certain things publicly, but not everything in detail, But of course, regarding, say, if God wills me at some point in the future, to have a godly wife and children and stuff like that, then of course I'd have no problem sharing it with them. I don't think. I mean, I really don't think, like, I feel like you should be comfortable just like having your soul be honest with your wife, you know, like, just like, this is me, this is my life, this is what I've experienced so far, and so on. I think, like, that's the way I see it. That's the way I see it. Yeah. Hmm. I was gonna say something else, but I forgot what it was. Let me see. Should be comfortable being honest with your wife. If God wills, I remember it at some point. So yeah, let's see. The margin says, "Ministry of angels, God turneth the offense of men to good. Two miracles in privation of one tongue and giving a new. Division among evil men is profitable. In particular, it was profitable to the good, who being before oppressed by the united power of many wicked were relieved, as Saint Gregory teacheth. When their persecutors were divided, the member offending is punished." I remember what it was. What I wanted to mention was that, regarding, say, the end of my life, right? Of course, that depends on the circumstances under which I die. I mean, because, I mean, if for example, I live until the actual Antichrist is here on earth, the actual specific man is here on earth, and if, for example, let's say I'm martyred during the Antichrist time, then perhaps I wouldn't have time, in a sense, to share my story completely because I would just undergo martyrdom, you know? So, yeah, I don't know. I've certainly thought about it. I don't know. I don't know. It's like part of me wants to share it, but then I'm also cautious about it, you know? Hmm. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Hmm. And I just had another thought regarding the Antichrist time. Oh yeah, regarding martyrdom. I was thinking the other day. I was like, if I were to die, let's say I were to die in a state of grace, like right now, right? Let's say God grant me the blessing of dying in the state of grace right now. I'm like, I would have so much debt to pay in purgatory that I'd be like, would it be in purgatory for like thousands of years or something, you know? And I was like, I think the only possible way that I could go straight to heaven, for example, would be to be martyred, you know? Because apart from that, I would have to spend so much time in purgatory. Probably way more time than my life on earth, you know? So imagine that. Imagine being in purgatory for thousands of years. And purgatory is not a nice place. You know, it's like I remember I knew this guy, this State of Acanthus, who was talking about purgatory. Like the way he spoke about it to me seemed like he was basically acting like purgatory was this kind of like this, you know, I guess to me it felt like he was undermining the horror of purgatory. Like purgatory is horrible, dude. Like it's not some nice place or something like you just like in the flowers or something, you know, dude. Like purgatory is really horrible, man. Really, really horrible. You know, extremely horrible place to be. It's just temporary, but it's very horrible. You know, and of course, contrary to hell, where there's all just despair, in purgatory you have hope, right? Because you know you will be saved by God eventually. But and that of course mitigates. That does help to alleviate uh, your suffering, but purgatory is still a really horrible place to be. You know, and I believe it was Saint Robert Bellarmine. I think I think it was him that mentioned that the worst aspect of the torment of hell is the despair. Like that's even worse than sensations and so on because it's like the despair of knowing that you will never get out of there, and also of course the regret of knowing that you put yourself there. You know. Let me add that to the questions. This is installment 13, right? Yeah. Let me go to that. 13. 13. Let's see. Did St. Robert Bellarmine say that despair is the most horrible aspect of being in hell? And that's the thing, too. Like, dude, hell is so horrible. Hell is so horrible. Is like, like the words of the Bible and stuff, they sound horrifying, of course, but the words can't truly do the place justice. Like you can't really understand perfectly and vividly the horror of being there just by reading about it, you know? Man, it's horrible, man. And then the feeling of hopelessness, dude, knowing that you never get out of there. You never get out of there, you know? Man. Hmm. You see, there's a part of me that like I kind of want to possibly share something that I experienced that kind of, God willing, gave me a more vivid understanding of what hell is like. Man, it's horrible, man. And that's the thing too, is like I often I often ask myself, or perhaps I don't know if it's often or not, but like I ask myself sometimes, like, like, why has God allowed me to experience these things? And I hope that I'm saved in the end, Like you hope. I pray. I really pray. I just want to go to heaven, man. I just want to get out of here. Honestly, you know? I just want to get out of here, man. Like the thing I hate most about being alive is the fact that you can sin. Like I hate that so much. I'm like, dang, man. Like that's the thing that I hate the most about being alive. That you can sin. Like you have the possibility of sinning. I'm like, man, I just want to get rid of that. I just want freedom from that completely, dude. I really do. And that's the thing. I feel like perhaps recently I've had the thought about how to possibly attain that. But I know that like I'm so wimpy regarding extreme mortification that it requires just buckets upon buckets of grace from God, and also the correct, like the right motivation to, God willing, motivate my soul and help me keep persevering in it. Yeah, because I know how fickle I am. I am so fickle. Like one, like, oh man, like you lost your motivation or something. Man, yeah. But hopefully, God willing, because I know, like, I think it might be, hold on. There was a saint, I believe, that said that for God to make a soul perfect in an instant would be like a just an incredible miracle. Like he almost never does that kind of thing. Let me see. Saint said that God usually does not make a soul perfect in an instant. And that's the thing, like, like I would much rather have that instantaneous perfection, where you believe the truth, you hate your sin, you become perfect, never sin again, and that's it. Like I would much rather that. And I guess like understanding that God perfecting your soul is usually a process, is not just like you're perfect. Like understanding that helps prevent me from falling into despair, you know? Yeah, it does. It definitely does help for sure. It definitely does help. Man. Hmm. sometimes I feel like I'm like, man, I don't want progress. I just want the goal, But perhaps God is like, no, you have to go through progress, you know? And, and then I think about the fact too that like we have no access to the Eucharist and stuff, which of course the Eucharist helps with quieting concupiscence and helps motivate your soul to, remain in the state of grace and avoid sin and stuff. And we don't have that help, you know. But then in a certain sense, that is not even an excuse, because in the Old Testament, they didn't have the Eucharist either. You see? In the Old Testament, they didn't have the Eucharist. So yeah, it's kind of like, on one hand, you could be like, we're at that disadvantage of not having the Eucharist. But then in the Old Testament, they didn't have the Eucharist either. So I guess we're kind of in a similar state to how people were in the Old Testament, where all they had was perfect contrition, to like return to the state of grace. Like there was no sacrament of confession, Yeah, I mean, so we're basically living in a state very similar to the Old Testament, Mm. Yeah, and it's like, yeah, I think the thing is too, like, I don't want people to perceive me as a holy person or something, I think that's another reason why I am cautious about sharing my life's journey to this point and so on, because I don't want people to like perceive me as some holy person, you know. I fall into sin many times, many times, many times. There have been periods of time where, by God's mercy, I've gone a certain amount of time, which I personally, think is like quite incredible, without, falling into sin. But it's not like I'm completely free of sin, perfect, never sin anymore at all, that kind of thing, which is what I want. I certainly want that. But if God wills me to have that at some point, I haven't, attained that yet. It's a war, man. It's a real war. It's a real war. And I'm contemplating right now, whether to share that experience that I had. That really, I think God willing, gave me a more vivid understanding of hell. I'm torn. I think the only person I've told about that experience is my earthly mother. Possibly. No. I told somebody else too. I don't know if I told her that one or not. But I told somebody else. A guy that I knew from like back in like secondary school, I guess I'm torn because I'm like, I wonder whether God allowed me to experience these things primarily for my own spiritual benefit, or does he also want those things to work for the spiritual benefit of other people? The problem for me is that, in a certain sense, for those things to be of spiritual benefit to other people, I would have to share those experiences with them, which unfortunately, I think has a strong possibility of making those people perceive me in a certain way that I don't be perceived in, like sharing those experiences with people, especially in a public way, or even in a private manner, I guess too, is like, I think it just has that danger, very strong danger of making people perceive me in a way that I don't want to be perceived, you know? Mm. Another thing, as I said before too, even with episode 2 of the podcast and stuff, I think episode 2 and episode 1, yeah, I think it's both of them, where it was like, I wish, in a sense, I don't feel strongly that way anymore, I guess. But at one point, I really wish there was someone else who professes the truth, believes in the true papacy, and is speaking in this public way, so that I wouldn't have to be the one doing it. Like, I really wanted to just be this silent, solitary person that wouldn't really talk with people and stuff like that generally, you know. But through seeing so many people lost in heresy and schism and darkness and stuff, like, I just felt so strongly compelled. Like, I felt like a burden on my shoulders. Like, I felt responsible in a way for sharing the truth with others. It felt kind of like, I guess I felt almost potentially guilty, where it was like, man, if I don't say anything, it's like, I feel like I was kind of like not really fulfilling my duty, because there's so many people in darkness, dude, like, so many people. And I was like, dang, man, like, you tell me there's no one else? I was like, there's no one else? Am I the only one, available to do this? That's kind of how it felt. It was like, when, like, it's kind of like, let's say, for example, let's say you're at work and there's this sort of like project that's like really difficult and nobody wants to do that project. And like, say the boss is asking, all right, who wants to do this project? And then everybody like just like leaves the room and you're the only one left there. And you're like, wait, where everybody went? And then you're the only person left. So like, okay, you'll do this project. I'm like, oh man, I didn't want to do it. It felt kind of like that. It was like, I'm like, is no one else available, dude? That's how I felt, man. Oh man. Yeah. I'm like, man. But of course the church is so small, I guess it makes sense. The chances statistically of someone being a true Catholic today, professing the true faith, accepting the true papacy, and also speaking English, like, and also perhaps having studied the stuff I've studied, like, the statistical chance of that person existing, and then also having a knowledge of how to make videos and stuff and videography and all that, is like, the statistical chance of that person existing is low. So it felt kind of like, the burden fell on me, the responsibility fell on me. But now I really do enjoy making these videos now, to be honest. Like, as I said, I feel kind of like almost addicted to reading the Bible and stuff now, whereas like I actually look forward to it, and I like that, it's not just me interpreting the Bible or something. Like, I'm reading the church fathers and stuff, like, so I'm just like sharing my understanding and my questions and my analysis regarding what they said and the Douay Rheims commentary and stuff, like, so it's not just me just picking up the Bible and just talking a bunch of nonsense and stuff. I like the fact that this series is guided by the church fathers and stuff, is guided by the doctors of the church. It's not my own machinations or me just, I'm not the one steering the boat here, like, necessarily. I'm relying on them and asking questions based on them and trying to learn from them and stuff, So it really anchors it in the Catholic faith, which is awesome, It keeps it grounded, But yeah, I'll have to see, God willing, whether at some point I feel like sharing some or all, or, you know, some of my experiences or my experiences and stuff like that. Because I mean, the stuff is like, it's truly incredible stuff, like truly amazing stuff. And it's just, it's incredible stuff, man. It's incredible stuff. And you're like, God, please, sir, I beg you, please, please don't let me experience all these things to ultimately just go to hell. I beg you, God, please, man, please, please, please let me experience these things and they ultimately lead me to heaven. I beg you. I really beg you, God. You know, I beg you, man. I beg you. I beg you. All right, so let's see now. Continuing. So the margin, right? The margin says ministry of angels, God turneth the offense of men to good, two miracles in privation of one tongue and giving a new, division among evil men is profitable. In particular, it was profitable to the good, who being before oppressed by the united power of many wicked, were relieved, as St. Gregory teacheth, when their persecutors were divided. The member offending is punished, the member offending is punished. Okay. The member offending is punished. Heber and his family consented not to the building of Babel. Gift of tongues most profitable to the church. And now 12 begat Saleh. Here is an intricate difficulty. For the Hebrew and Latin text, both here and in Paralipomenon, saying Arphaxad begat Saleh, the 72 interpreters and St. Luke place Canaan between them as son of Arphaxad and father of Saleh. Wait, what? Son of Arphaxad? No, I'm confused. Wait. 12, hold on. Begat Saleh. Wait. Is this a different Canaan? It says here is an intricate difficulty. For the Hebrew and Latin text, both here and in Paralipomenon, saying Arphaxad begat Saleh, the 72 interpreters and St. Luke place Canaan between them as son of Arphaxad and father of Saleh. Okay, so this is a different Canaan then. This is not the son of Cush, right? I guess it's meaning a different Canaan. Because it says son of Arphaxad, not son of Ham. I mean Ham, son of Ham, I mean not son of Cush. I guess this is a different Canaan, not the son of Ham. Not the son of Ham or Cham, a son of Arphaxad. Okay, interesting. Continuing, let's read this again. 12 begat Saleh. Here is an intricate difficulty. For the Hebrew and Latin text, both here and in Paralipomenon, saying Arphaxad begat Saleh, the 72 interpreters and St. Luke place Canaan between them as son of Arphaxad and father of Saleh. Eusebius also in his chronicle, with most Greek doctors and St. Augustine, count Canaan in this genealogy of Sem. Sem is not Cham. Whereupon many do number him in this rank and suppose that Moses omitted him for some mystery, and yet writeth truly that Arphaxad begat Saleh, not his proper son, but his son's son. As Saint Matthew saith, Joram begat Ozias, who was his nephew's nephew. You see, I was thinking originally when I first read this, I believe, that this was the same Canaan who was Ham or Cham's son. But this must be a different Canaan because it says in the genealogy of Sem, not Cham or Ham. Okay. Because when it said Moses omitted him when it says, whereupon many do number him in this rank and suppose that Moses omitted him for some mystery. I was thinking Moses possibly omitted him because he was cursed by Noah, but it seems this is a different Canaan. Okay, I think this is a different Canaan. Yeah, genealogy of Sem, not Cham. Okay, let's read. Let's continue. Whereupon many do number him in this rank, and suppose that Moses omitted him for some mystery, and yet writeth truly that Arphaxad begat Saleh, not his proper son, but his son's son, as Saint Matthew saith, Joram begat Ozias, who was his nephew's nephew. But against this solution it is replied that then Arphaxad should have been a grandfather at 35 years of age, which were strange in those days, howsoever it is now. And a greater difficulty, or rather absurdity, must also be granted that Arphaxad begat both Canaan at the age of 35 years, according to the 72 interpreters, and that Saleh was also begotten the same year, according to the Hebrew, being both true, which inconvenience is not in the genealogy written by St. Matthew. Others, therefore, according to the Hebrew and Latin text, with most Latin doctors, omit Canaan in this place, and Paralipomenon, namely with St. Jerome, who diligently examining, in this place, and Paralipomenon, namely with St. Jerome, who diligently examining and reconciling varieties between the Hebrew and the Greek, maketh no mention at all of this difference, which maketh some to conjecture that in St. Jerome's time Canaan was not in the Greek copies, at least not in those that he had and held for the best. And at this day some have him not, which may be admitted for a probable answer touching the Hebrew and the Greek of the Old Testament. But for so much as all copies, both Greek and Latin, wait, okay, but for so much as all copies, both Greek and Latin, also St. Jerome's edition of St. Luke's Gospel have Canaan, the difficulty still remaineth between Moses and St. Luke. How then shall this doubt be solved? We cannot solve it, and no marvel, for Venerable Bede could not, whose words are these. St. Luke useth rather the Greek testimonies than the Hebrew, whereof happeneth that I much marvel at, and for dullness of wit, being stricken with great admiration, I cannot thoroughly scan, seeing in the Hebrew verity are found only 10 generations from the flood unto Abraham, by what means St. Luke, who, the Holy Ghost governing his pen, could in no sort write false, would rather set down 11 generations in the gospel, Canaan adjoined according to the 70 interpreters. Let me read that again. Okay, how then shall this doubt be solved? We cannot solve it, and no marvel, for Venerable Bede could not, whose words are these. St. Luke useth rather the Greek testimonies than the Hebrew, whereof happeneth that I much marvel at, and for dullness of wit, being stricken with great admiration, I cannot thoroughly scan, seeing in the Hebrew verity are found only 10 generations from the flood unto Abraham, by what means St. Luke, I cannot thoroughly scan, seeing in the Hebrew verity are found only 10 generations from the flood unto Abraham, by what means St. Luke, who, the Holy Ghost governing his pen, could in no sort write false, would rather set down 11 generations in the gospel, Canaan adjoined according to the 70 interpreters. Thus writeth St. Beda, reverently admiring that he could not understand, for being assured that the Holy Ghost governed the pens both of Moses and St. Luke, and that he is not contrary to himself, it must needs be true which each of them writeth, though other learned men cannot reach the profoundness of some difficulties that occur, and therefore Beza was extremely saucy to dash Canaan out of St. Luke's gospel, and that wit and that wittingly oh and that wittingly and most impudently saying in his annotations, non dubitalimus expungere, we doubted not to put it out. The former English editions, otherwise corrupt in many places, have Canaan in the text of St. Luke's Gospel, but their latter translators are in this point pure Bazites. Okay. In the margin for 12, it says, Scripture's hard. Some think Moses omitted Canaan for a mystery. Refutation. Others conjecture Canaan should not be in the text of the 70, but never any Catholic nor heretic before Beza put Canaan out of St. Luke's Gospel. A memorable sentence of St. Beza sacrilegiously proud. The heretical English editions differ in this point. And then it says the end of the Second Age. So we're at an hour and a half now. I think, God willing, it makes sense to save this next section for next time. Yeah, because it is like 2:11 a.m. for me right now. And I do want to check on the kitten and stuff like that too. But yeah, I am still thinking about whether to share, experiences that I've had or not. Torn about it. Not certain. Yeah, because it has really been something, that's for sure. Even before I became Catholic as well, there are certain things that happened before I became Catholic, that are not typical, let's say, And honestly, like, it's interesting because there's a very specific thing that I experienced before I became Catholic. When I later read Saint Anthony of Egypt and what he said about demons, I was like, that happened to me, like the same thing he was talking about. I was like, that was just spot on, spot on, man. I don't know. And it's interesting because when I was like a pagan at university, I was planning to make like an animated movie, like a stop motion movie kind of thing about basically the experiences that I had in the summer of 2018, I think it was, because that was a very, very like eye-opening, pivotal summer for me that just like completely just shattered my previous understanding of the world and stuff and really made me like very strongly and vividly aware of the spiritual world, Man, I'm torn. Yeah, because it's like, as I said, like there's a part of me that feels like sharing at least this specific experience, the one where I said, like, it gave me a more vivid understanding of hell, God willing. But then there's a part of me that has some reservation about it, mainly because, like, I don't want like a public image that paints me as a holy person, Like, I feel like a public image like that should only be something that takes place if you never sin ever, ever, at all, ever. You know what I mean? Yeah. Hmm. I'll have to see, God willing, man. Hmm. May God have mercy, man. You know, God willing, I'll think about it. Who knows? I might not end up sharing it for years from now or something. But as I said, if God wills to grant me a godly wife at some point, then I'd have no problem sharing those things with her. Just being like completely honest about all I've experienced and stuff like that. God willing. So yeah, because I feel like like if my experiences should benefit anyone apart other than myself, my wife should be the first person. She should be the first one to also benefit from it spiritually, because my life, in a sense, becomes her life also. Become one flesh. Your lives become one life together. That kind of thing. And then, of course, your children. Yeah. But I was thinking too the other day about like, if I were to live until the actual Antichrist is on the earth, like what age I would have to be at least. And based on Our Lady of La Salette and the book, The Prophets in Our Times, basically saying that it is possible, not, a guarantee or something, but it was saying basically that essentially based on that, the next year where that it lines up with a certain prophecy, which likely is the 3 days of darkness, the year will be 2038. That will be the next year that likely could be, based on that specific prophecy and stuff, when the 3 days of darkness will take place, which is of course 12 years from now, as far as calendar years are concerned. And I was trying to calculate, like, because we're in 2026 now. If I live to see the end of this year, I'll be 30. So that will be, let's see, 2026. All right, 2030 is how many years from now? 12, right? So 30 plus 12, that'll be 42, right? That's crazy. I think I'll be 42 if I would live to that point. Or 41 before December. My birthday is in December. And then there's 25 years of the age of peace. So add 25 to that. That's 67. And then there's a precursor to the Antichrist, but I don't know how much time he would be around for before the actual Antichrist. So theoretically, though, based on that information, I would have to be at least 67 years of age when the Antichrist shows up. So I'd be like an old man at that point, basically. That's kind of crazy to think about, though. If I were to actually live to see the actual Antichrist, that'd be crazy. And then perhaps also live to see Enoch and Elijah actually return to the general conversation of humanity, human civilization. That'd be crazy too. Man, wow. That'd be interesting stuff, right? To actually see Enoch and Elijah return and be like, that's them, Wow, man. Yeah. But yeah, I really do pray to go to heaven, man. I really do. Because if you don't go to heaven in the end, then all this was for nothing. That's the truth right there. All your efforts, all your everything was for nothing if you don't go to heaven in the end. Man, it's a violent war for sure. It's a real war. It's a real war. And, I can't say God willing, I hope, that I can see perhaps progress in certain areas, but I'm not satisfied with progress. I want the end result, I want the goal of it. I want the end result. the good end result, God willing, like I'm not satisfied with just progress. Like even for example, regarding things that, help you avoid sin and stuff like that, I've often said that, like, to my recollection, that I'm not satisfied with something that helps, I want a solution, I don't want help, I want a solution, I want the end of sin. I don't want just less sin or less frequent sin, I want no sin at all. So yeah, man. Hmm. Well, I think that's it for this installment. God willing, I have to change the name to like probably the Tower of Babel Part 2 or something, because to continue this, I think it'll be like I'd be up till like 4 or 5 a.m. or something, And God willing, I perhaps do want to, rest now. Although there is a kitten, if God wills that the kitten is still alive and so on, So yeah. Well, if you are a true Catholic, may God bless you. If you are not a true Catholic, may God grant you the grace and blessing of conversion, and may He free you from whatever bad state you are in. And may God grant all of you the grace and blessing of one day dying as saints, and may He grant me that grace and blessing as well. Amen. God willing, I might continue this tomorrow, because since I have, more free time in a certain sense, as far as, being naturally speaking alone here right now, that might be something. But we'll see what God wills, God willing, right?